In 1923, a girl walked into Millfield, Alabama, and nobody could agree on what she looked like. To some, she had bright blonde hair and green eyes. To others, dark curls and brown skin. The strange part? They were all looking at the same person at the same time. What happened next would haunt this small town for generations, and the truth behind her identity reveals something far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The first person to see her was Marcus Thompson, the station master at Millfield's tiny railroad depot. It was October 15th, 1923, just past sunset when the evening train wheezed to a stop. Only one passenger stepped off that night. Marcus later told Sheriff Coleman that she was a young white woman, maybe 20 years old, with golden hair that caught the lamplight like spun silk. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small leather suitcase. But here's where the story gets strange. Mary Washington, who cleaned the depot every evening, was standing right next to Marcus when the girl stepped off the train. Mary swore on her grandmother's grave that the passenger was a young black woman with tight curls and the most beautiful dark skin she'd ever seen. Same blue dress, same leather suitcase, but completely different person. Marcus and Mary argued about it right there on the platform. Not just a disagreement about details, but a full argument about whether they were even looking at the same human being. The girl just stood there, watching them with what Marcus called the saddest smile I ever did see. Mary said she wasn't smiling at all. The girl finally spoke, and this is where multiple witnesses start to agree on something. Her voice was soft, almost musical, with an accent nobody could place. She asked for directions to the Hartwell boarding house on Elm Street. Both Marcus and Mary pointed the same direction, though they still couldn't agree on who exactly they were giving directions to. Word travels fast in a town of 800 people. By the time the girl reached Mrs. Hartwell's boarding house, half the town was talking about the strange passenger. Mrs. Hartwell opened her door expecting to see the young white woman Marcus had described over the telephone. Instead, she found herself face to face with what she later described as a beautiful Mexican girl with olive skin and the longest black hair I ever saw. Mrs. Hartwell was so confused she called out to her neighbor, old Pete Morrison, who was sitting on his porch, whittling. Pete hobbled over and took a long look at the girl standing in the doorway. He saw a young Native American woman with traditional braided hair and high cheekbones. When Mrs. Hartwell asked him to describe what he was seeing, Pete and Mrs. Hartwell got into the same type of argument that had happened at the train station. The girl paid for a week's stay in advance, using crisp new bills that Mrs. Hartwell later said felt wrong somehow, like they were too perfect. She signed the guest registry with a name that looked different to everyone who read it. Mrs. Hartwell read Sarah Mitchell. Pete Morrison saw Mary Standing Bear. The next person to look at the registry saw something else entirely. By the end of the first week, the whole town was talking about the girl who looked like everyone. Shop owners would describe completely different customers buying the same items at the same time. Children would come home from school talking about the new girl who looked exactly like their older sister, or their aunt, or their best friend's mother. Dr. Edmund Hayes, the town's only physician, decided to investigate what he assumed was some kind of mass hysteria. He arranged to examine the girl at his office, inviting several prominent townspeople to observe. What happened in that room on October 23, 1923, would be talked about in Millfield for the next century. Dr. Hayes saw a young Irish woman with red hair and freckles. Banker James Morrison saw a young Chinese woman with straight black hair. Teacher Elizabeth Cotton saw a young woman who looked exactly like her dead daughter. Reverend William Stone saw someone he refused to describe, but who made him leave the room immediately, muttering prayers under his breath. The girl sat patiently through all of this, answering Dr. Hayes's questions in that same musical voice. She said she was 21 years old, that she had come from far away, and that she was looking for someone. When pressed about who she was looking for, she said, "I'll know when I find them." Dr. Hayes tried a simple experiment. He asked everyone in the room to write down exactly what they saw when they looked at the girl, without talking to each other. The results were impossible. 7 people, looking at the same person, sitting in the same chair, under the same lamp. Wrote down 7 completely different descriptions. Not similar descriptions with small differences, but entirely different people. That night, Dr. Hayes wrote in his journal, "Either I am losing my mind, or this girl is something that defies every law of nature I understand. She shows no signs of illness, deformity, or deception. Yet somehow, she appears differently to each person who looks upon her. I fear we are dealing with something beyond medical science." The girl seemed to know exactly what effect she was having on people. She would often be seen standing in the town square, just watching people's reactions as they noticed her. Some would smile and wave, seeing a familiar face. Others would cross the street, disturbed by something they couldn't name. Children were especially affected. They would stare at her for long periods, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, but always with an intensity that made their parents uncomfortable. Mrs. Hartwell noticed other strange things about her boarder. The girl never seemed to sleep. Mrs. Hartwell's room was directly above the girl's, and she never heard footsteps, bed springs, or any sound at all during the night. But every morning, the girl would appear at breakfast looking perfectly rested. She ate very little, mostly picking at her food while watching the other boarders with those eyes that everyone described differently. The girl also had an uncanny knowledge of people's personal lives. She would make casual comments about things she couldn't possibly know. She mentioned to the postmaster that his sister in Montgomery was feeling better, days before he received a letter saying his sister had recovered from pneumonia. She told the blacksmith that his horse was going to throw a shoe on Thursday, and sure enough, it happened exactly as she predicted. 2 weeks after her arrival, people started having dreams about the girl. Not normal dreams, but vivid, disturbing visions where she would appear as someone from their past. She would show up as a childhood friend who had died, a relative who had moved away, or sometimes as themselves, but different somehow. In every dream, she would ask the same question, "Do you remember me now?" The dreams were so realistic and consistent that Dr. Hayes started keeping a log of them. Person after person would come to him, describing almost identical dream encounters with the girl. In every case, the dreamer would wake up with an overwhelming sense of loss, as if they had forgotten something incredibly important. By November 1st, the dreams had started affecting the entire town. People were losing sleep, becoming irritable and suspicious of each other. Arguments broke out over simple disagreements about what the girl looked like. Families stopped talking to each other. The town was slowly tearing itself apart. Sheriff Coleman decided he needed to take action. He went to Mrs. Hartwell's boarding house on November 3rd, intending to ask the girl some hard questions about her identity and purpose in Millfield. Mrs. Hartwell led him to the girl's room and knocked on the door. No answer. She used her master key to unlock the room. The room was empty. Not just empty of the girl, but empty of everything. No clothes, no suitcase, no personal belongings. The bed was made with military precision, as if it had never been slept in. The window was closed and locked from the inside. There was no sign anyone had ever stayed in that room at all. But here's the strangest part. When Sheriff Coleman asked Mrs. Hartwell to check her guest registry, the girl's name was gone. The page where she had signed in was blank, as if no one had ever written on it. Mrs. Hartwell insisted she had seen the girl sign the book, but there was no evidence of it now. The girl had simply vanished, leaving no trace except the memories of a town full of people who couldn't agree on what she had looked like. Over the next few weeks, life in Millfield slowly returned to normal. People stopped having the strange dreams. Arguments were forgotten. The girl became just another local mystery, the kind of story people told at barbershops and church socials. But the story doesn't end there. In 1935, during the Great Depression, a girl matching various descriptions of the Millfield visitor appeared in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Same blue dress, same leather suitcase, same musical voice. She stayed for exactly 2 weeks before vanishing without a trace. In 1947, she appeared in Mobile. In 1959, Montgomery. In 1971, Birmingham. Always the same pattern. Always the same mysterious departure. Always leaving behind a town full of people who couldn't agree on what she looked like. but who would never forget the feeling of seeing her. Local historians have tried to trace the pattern, but records are scarce, and witness accounts are, as you might expect, wildly inconsistent. What they have found is more disturbing than the original story. In each town she visited, there was always one person who never saw her differently. One person who saw her exactly as she was, without any variation or confusion. And in each case, that person disappeared exactly 1 week after the girl left town. In Millfield, it was Tommy Patterson, a young man who worked at the general store. Tommy told everyone who would listen that the girl looked like his sister Ruth, who had died in the influenza pandemic of 1918. He said she looked so much like Ruth that it made him physically sick to see her. Tommy disappeared on November 10, 1923, exactly 1 week after the girl vanished from Mrs. Hartwell's boarding house. His body was never found, but his personal belongings were discovered in the woods outside town, arranged in a perfect circle around a photograph of his dead sister. The photograph showed Ruth Patterson, but everyone who looked at it saw someone different. Some saw the mysterious girl from the boarding house. Others saw their own departed loved ones. If you believe the stories, and if you know what to look for, she might still be out there, still traveling from town to town, still appearing as whoever people need her to be, or fear her to be. Still looking for that one person in each place who can see her truly. The question that haunts every version of this story is simple. What happens when she finds who she's really looking for? The last confirmed sighting was in 1994, in a small town just outside Atlanta. A girl in a blue dress, carrying a leather suitcase, asking directions with a musical voice that nobody could place. She stayed for 2 weeks, confused an entire town about what she looked like, and vanished without a trace. But here's what the investigators found that was different from all the other cases. This time, there were 2 people who saw her the same way. 2 people who insisted she looked exactly like someone they knew. They both described her as looking like the same person, a young woman who had died in a car accident in 1993. Both witnesses disappeared the same night, exactly 1 week after the girl left town. Their cars were found at the edge of a lake, but the bodies were never recovered. Inside one of the cars, investigators found a Polaroid photograph. The photograph showed a young woman in a blue dress, standing next to what appeared to be the same lake where the cars were found. But depending on who looked at the photograph, they saw completely different faces staring back at them. That photograph is currently in the evidence locker of the Atlanta Police Department, case file #942847. The case remains open. Some say she's still out there, still traveling, still looking. Others believe she found what she was searching for in 1994, and that's why the sighting stopped. But if you ever find yourself in a small southern town, and you see a girl in a blue dress who looks exactly like someone you used to know, someone you lost, someone who couldn't possibly be there,
don't try to get a second look. Don't ask anyone else what they see. And whatever you do, don't tell her she looks familiar.
Because the one thing every witness in every town agreed on was this. She was always looking for someone who would recognize her, and nobody who ever said they did was seen again.